Hello, my name is Sean Ryan, and today I'm doing a presentation on the application of hyperequity on subgroup achievement gaps. This study was conducted within the Clarkson Community School District, where I'm currently Superintendent of Schools. Equity and hyperequity in the school context is really a theme that the district is currently undertaking with respect to its strategic planning process. And really, equity is actualized or realized, monitored in terms of student achievement gaps. Looking at the subgroups within a school district can really put the context to make sure that all students are being represented and have a great opportunity to be successful. Equity in terms of the school setting is really a piece where resources and program access are distributed not on an equal basis necessarily, but based on student need, so that at the end of the day, all students can be successful. When measuring equity, again, within those subgroup classifications, it can be put in terms of student achievement scores and potentially access and utilization of high-end programming and access to other type of resources like healthcare and mental health care and other type of things that really lend to the students' overall well-being. For this study, we brought about the notion of hyperequity, which is really looking at how resources are distributed to actually affect outcomes. Currently, equity is really represented in most school systems with the addition of potential Title I or at-risk money that's provided by the state and federal government. Although these do add additional resources to these schools, in most cases, nationwide and statewide, they do not have a tremendous impact on actually changing the outcome for student subgroups or students that are normally not represented. With hyperequity, we're really looking at the potential distribution of resources and programming in a way that achieves results, and it's my belief that it will require more than the normal quote-unquote equity to get the desired results. And I really feel like this is a moral and ethical imperative for school systems, superintendents, and communities to take a look at the subgroup students they have and really give them a voice, because if the leadership within a community and a school system doesn't provide these type of supports, we really can't look for anyone in the outside world to provide that. And for the most part, students in these subgroups, whether it be racial, economic, or other, are usually put in a position to where they don't have a voice, and when they do have a voice, it's not put in a position to really affect change. And I think that's our responsibility. As I mentioned, Clarkson Community Schools is currently undergoing a strategic planning process. Looking at equity in this context, you can see that it does not exist in space. Equity is not a thing that produces an outcome, but really has to be put in the context of initiatives and programming to where student outcomes can be changed. In the case of Clarkson Community Schools, we're really breaking into four major pillars, of which we see equity as a theme throughout within the context of the vision and the vision. Clarkson Schools is undertaking goals within the area of whole person development, foundational and academic skills, and student-focused learning and future pathways. We believe that in combination of these four areas with respect to equity, that real student growth for all subgroups can be achieved. Within that notion of all kids being achieved or have the opportunity to achieve within our school district, we're also looking at in the context of high reliability. Within the Marzano work, we look at our school district, especially in terms of equity and overall performance, that we want performance of our schools to be within a fairly tight, defined outcome line, and also be linked together with some strong goals and have a strong notion that really these goals or the outcomes for students need to be for all kids regardless of what kind of school they go to, and that individual buildings need some variability and some defined autonomy to be able to achieve these goals. Really, we want to build awareness and celebrate differences between our schools, but we want them all achieving at high levels, and we feel to do that we're going to have to deploy resources and supports on really a need basis and a really hardcore need basis, and push away from that notion of standard issue, quote unquote, for all, in terms of equal distribution of teaching staff, supports, programming access, and etc. And really, we have to acknowledge the gaps that we have in our student subgroups and take on the piece as a problem-solving team district-wide, as opposed to this just being a single building problem or a single subgroup problem. To do this, we really think that we need to examine our overall student data through multiple measures. Again, with that focus on subgroups, we really have to look at a context, and in this case, a focus on student achievement that can be defined both quantitatively and qualitatively. We need to be able to break down our district subgroups and really look at individual building subgroups and look at the potential gaps that exist. And to do this, we really want to get a strong sense of the notion of what kind of program that this data is attached to, the specific subgroup demographic that we're looking at, obviously the student achievement data that it reflects, and even looking at the students themselves and how they feel about their experience in school and their opportunities for success. For the purpose of this study, we're focusing in on the K-5 math and literacy programs within Clarkston Community Schools. Within K-5 literacy, Clarkston has adopted a balanced literacy approach, and it's built on the workshop model. We've been working on bringing alignment for over the last 7 years, and really feel that our teachers have had an opportunity to really develop and grow within the practices district-wide, because they work on grade level teams multiple times through years. We rely on teacher laboratories, and in this past year and a half, we've even added literacy coaches to each building, of which we spent much time in selecting the best of the best and training our literacy coaches over the last 2 years at both Teachers College at Columbia for the practices of literacy, and as a cohort going through several learning studies on adult learning practices to really bring to bear the highest value of support within that Tier 1 instruction. So a big part of our professional development program long term, really the leverage point in literacy, is the coaching model, and we have a pretty high level of tech integration and support. 3 years ago, Clarkston passed a $76 million bond, of which we've been working to integrate technology at every level. Student access is very strong. We look at their ability to use applications, not only word processing for the writing portion, and also different type of word study applications that students can perform individually or groups or at home. We also use the technology to facilitate our parent communication within the application called Seesaw, which is really an ongoing student portfolio that teachers upload data and videos and student work right into it, which immediately, through the app on a parent's phone, contacts that parent so they can actually almost in real time see some of the activities that their students are doing in school. So to support that, at another level of teacher development and professional development, is that we also have 7 technology integration specialists that are assigned across our buildings and throughout the district, and they work as a team to bring awareness and support to teachers in using technology on a day-to-day basis. They really take the standpoint of looking at what a teacher is currently working on or what their lessons entail, and asking questions and providing technology know-how to improve or get the lessons to where they might have a technology slant as well. As far as the mathematics in Clarkston K-5, we've adopted the math workshop model. We've been doing that process over the last, really intently over the last 5 years to really get the practices to make an inquiry-based math program. We brought in the support pieces of the Bridges. That was put in place. This is the 3rd year of that resource to kind of integrate with the workshop model. And as in literacy, we've heavily relied on teacher labs and the opportunity for teachers to work in a live classroom with master teachers, teaching lessons with their colleagues in the room, to where discussions and dialogue to really develop the practice. Because we've realized through our own internal assessment that not necessarily one teacher has all the parts put together, but individual teachers have very strong points or within strong units, and we really want to be able to share that out. Again, trying to really build that Tier 1 instruction, which we believe is going to reach most students, especially students in subgroups. That math workshop and the math laboratories have gained notoriety that our ISD in Oakland and through the state of Michigan have sent teachers to even watch and monitor the practice that's going on in these professional development areas. Technology and mathematics. Again, there's a wealth of classroom resources, the document cameras, the math applications that are built not only into the Bridges program for free, but our teachers, with the support of the technology integration specialists, have brought about a fair number of applications to support students that are learning at different levels, that need different challenges, and also to support remediation with that format. There's handheld, there's pretty much everything that's Chrome-based Clarkson Schools brings to bear. Examining the data, breaking the demographics, student achievement, and perception data to really tell the story of how Clarkson students are doing, especially with respect to those subgroups. To do that, I've highlighted of our school district, it really falls into two major groups. We have 7 elementaries in Clarkston, and within those 7 elementaries, roughly half of them fall with a very high level of socioeconomic status or low need, and the other half of our school district has a high number of socioeconomic status needs and really contrast based on the side of town, and does a very interesting split on the overall district average, as I'm going to show. Pulling back the covers first on Bailey Lake Elementary, and really looking at a combination of really being on a kind of, I want to say, the upperly mobile side of town. You see that within this school that the disadvantaged percentage is at roughly 11, and it's 86% white, fairly split on the gender, about 11% on special ed status, and a very low 3% for limited English language learners. On the other side of town, picked to represent the schools on that as North Sashba Elementary, and you can immediately see, just with an eye look, that there's a fairly big contrast between the two buildings. North Sash Elementary, which is fairly typical for the schools on that side of town, a little bit on the high end, but it has 63% disadvantaged students, again roughly split on the gender, a little more diverse in terms of race and ethnicity, with only 74% white. Special ed status climbs dramatically higher at 19%, again looking at between 11, and our English limited learners goes up to 11%, or roughly 3 times that level or more compared to Bailey Lake. If you look at the two schools, they're really geographically only about 4 miles apart, very much different demographics, and the property values and the access to health care and everything else between the two sides of town is pretty stark as well. When you look at our district as a whole, if we look at the quote-unquote average, and what that really shows is that Clarkston has roughly 57% of our students reaching ELA proficiency within the programs outlined earlier, and 56% in math proficiency. Overall, district socioeconomic breakdown is roughly 27%, and our special education percentage is 15%. Obviously, this is interesting in terms of, first of all, the context between the state of Michigan, the county, and the state. By most standards, Clarkston could be pretty satisfied to say that they are way above state average. And within Oakland County, which is probably one of the top 2 counties in the state of Michigan, they also are above the county average as well. But again, looking at that 57 and 56, that percent, that average, really does not tell the story of Clarkston Community Schools. To look at a broader district perspective, you can really see, looking at the math and the ELA achievement data versus the socioeconomic data, that very closely tied correlation between percentage of disadvantaged students at all of our 7 elementaries and their overall proficiency. Really, the average is a phantom because either schools seem to be performing significantly above or below that average, and there seems to be a pretty high disparity within the subgroup of socioeconomic status, especially in terms of we're looking at that context for equity and hyper-equity. A couple things really immediately draw to mind that Clarkston Schools does not appear, as I'll state again, for looking at the high reliability school districts in terms of achievement, and also seems to be a pretty strong disparity within the socioeconomic status as well. You see that as well pan through with our special education stats with pretty fluctuating numbers. Again, students that go to school at a higher needs school seem to have a higher percentage of special ed as well, whether that's directly based on disability or kind of as a downriver effect of having students that are not being proficient or struggling based on required supports is to be determined. Peeling back the covers or looking a little deeper, doing a deeper dive between Bailey Lake and North Sashaba Elementary within these averages. Again, going from the averages to looking at two schools, one being way above that average. If you look at the ELA group versus North Sash, just toggling between the slides, it's pretty apparent that there's a lot more as far as achievement in the school Bailey Lake with not as high disadvantaged students, and the proficiency is pretty stark. Also, kind of noting within this achievement data for ELA is that students at Bailey Lake, if you look at their disadvantaged students, they actually perform fairly well. Even at 57% proficient, better than the not disadvantaged students at North Sashaba Elementary, which really kind of puts a stark contrast within the building that pretty much in every category, whether it's looking at the race and ethnicity or the socioeconomic status, the school that has a much higher level of disadvantaged students, all students seem to be performing at a lower rate. And that holds true with not disadvantaged students as well. At Bailey Lake, you have roughly 66% proficient, and not disadvantaged at North Sashaba, 53%. Although that, it should be noted, is a lot tighter. And if you were to compare the means across between the buildings just on not disadvantaged, there would be, I think, a much different outcome overall in a comparison between the two buildings. This level of data also transcends and holds true for the math. If you look at between the achievement data and the math, you really do see, again, that pretty stark contrast in terms of overall achievement. And again, interestingly enough, the disadvantaged students at Bailey Lake achieve at 55% proficient, and the not disadvantaged students at North Sash are only 49%. Again, to me, systematically, system-wise, this shows that although there's a lot of extra programming in terms of title supports at North Sash, it really does not seem like at the end of the day that they're able to really be as successful, be in the same ballpark with students at Bailey Lake. So obviously, again, this puts to a high degree, not as much in my mind as a responsibility of individual building principals and their staffs, but really looking at the district as a whole and their support of a high reliability piece. Looking at the demographic data and self-perception, looking at both buildings within a larger survey, a couple of really telling questions that I pulled out of that survey for the purpose of this study, we're really looking at the students and how they felt about their own abilities in math and ELA. And in both cases, traditionally, as you see, if you look at mathematics, generally students on probably the scope of the entire country feel like math's a little bit more of a difficult subject area and they're maybe not as proficient as they go on, show at a lower rate than ELA. And also this really captures students 3rd through 5th grade. If you look at the K2 data, it's interesting to see that pretty much all students in every building feel like they are a great reader, they're a great mathematician, they're a great singer, they're great in gym and everything else, which is absolutely where we want all students to be. It is kind of telling here, though, between both math and ELA at these two buildings, it is significant. The North Sash students themselves see themselves as lower performers or lower ability level than their counterparts at Bailey Lake. To me, this is concerning from the standpoint that we want all students to be able to really look at themselves to be successful, and we know that there's a lot of research that really supports that idea, that notion of self-fulfilled prophecy, where students, if they don't feel like they can do it, or led to believe, or believe internally or through family supports that they can't, they'll follow that trend to the end in terms of their own achievement as well. So, Narrowing the gaps. Obviously, we identified a pretty substantial demographic within socioeconomic status, and what can be done? Well, first of all, those key observations again, right? Obviously, when I reviewed the data, there's a large disparity in that SES, that student success rates are lower for all SES students in Clarkston, and that is at every building. And even that point, I identified that if you're in a higher need building, all students, both lower or high need and not need, all perform lower. And that Clarkston Schools, obviously, if you look at the standpoint of the entire school district, is not a high reliability school district. And that self-perception piece is that it's more negative in the lower SE schools. The two that I provide as an example tell for the rest of the school district as well, and that's a pretty substantial overall data dig in a broad way. So, looking at the SES gap and narrowing that within the context of the strategic planning, we really look at, to get success in this area, it's not going to be simply a focus on math and ELA. Really looking at students with high need, we really believe that it's a complex solution that's going to require work in the social mental health area and academic supports, really within all four pillars in terms of access to programming and everything else, to get students to all achieve at a higher level. So this broad spectrum approach is going to require investment in all the pillars that we mentioned within that greater strategic plan. There's going to have to be a significant increase in investment, I believe, in the schools with the higher SES populations, and it's going to require site-specific plans. It's not going to be good enough just to throw money at the problem, but it's going to need high impact programming that really transcends outside the context even of the K-5 experience, and potentially has us really reaching out to investing in early childhood, and even when the students literally leave the womb. This discrepancy in socioeconomic status in terms of achievement really begins from the moment the students start their lives and continues to spread in terms of a gap their entire lives. And that really pans out in terms of a lot of national statistics. I really think we're going to need some long-term investment in consistent high-impact programming, and we're going to have to put a lot of care to make sure that it's implemented with fidelity and over time. The specific programming developed to narrow these gaps, and the combined professional development that will have to go along with it. Well, really looking at those schools and developing their individual plan, the high-impact pieces that we're going to help to try to support within the context of these individual developed plans is that instructional alignment and Tier 1 work, especially with the support of those coaches and those teacher labs. We really feel like that the more that we can work on that curriculum alignment has some pretty strong impact. We also want to support initiatives that deal with trauma and behavior in way of all of our schools, especially our lower socioeconomic status schools, being trauma informed, and how we interpret student behavior and how we work to really help students resolve the issues they have coming into school so that they can be ready and supported to learn. A lot of the research also suggests that we need to provide additional experiences in terms of summer and outside the school day programming. And this is more than just drill and kill on academics, but really some of the gaps between socioeconomic status come from student opportunities to really experience the outside world, whether it's museums or ponds or woods or other type of experiences, to where many middle-class students take for granted. Some lower socioeconomic status students don't really get those opportunities, and it really has a lot to do with brain development and their eventual success in school. Additionally, preschool early childhood interventions become key. The earlier, and all research suggests that the earlier the interventions and these gaps can be narrowed, the better the long-term prognosis is. That really elementary and even before is the key areas for these interventions, and middle school becomes a little less impact, and in high school even less, and et cetera, et cetera. We want to support low class sizes in these buildings, although normally low class size is kind of a moderate impact. We think that as part of the overall packages, it states not only a support for the teachers and their overall emphasis to try to narrow these gaps, but gives the support to have more individualized attention. So we're talking about class sizes 20 and under in our lower socioeconomic status buildings, and really also requiring some increase in class sizes in our higher SES buildings or our higher mobile buildings, because a lot of research, and I think it'll pan out in Clarkson as well, that students will perform well because they are ready to learn, and in a lot of cases, they're kind of ahead of the game. Also within the school district, you think that homeschool partnerships are going to be huge. We need to help support our families, because really education and poverty go hand in hand, and really getting our families, especially at those low SES schools or struggling schools, where they can get the additional help at home, and that could come in many different forms. And then finally, that physical mental health piece in our school district with respect to clinics and having access to health care within the schools themselves. A lot of our research has shown that a lot of these students are eligible for Medicaid, but really looking at access to Medicaid in Clarkson, our research has shown that really only about 1% to 2% of doctors in the Clarkson area accept Medicaid, which really blocks out a giant part of our population from access. So we're in the process right now of working to bring these medical clinics into all of our schools, especially our students that have the higher need. I'm thinking that, again, health and mental health are key components of that overall support that students need to be successful in school. It's not just about the reading and writing and math. Moving forward, really see the big pieces in terms of the themes of communication, connection, relationship, leadership, persistence, and accountability. Really, communication is going to be huge. This very presentation is being shared with our Board of Education. It's been shared with our administrative staff, our teacher leaders, and really feel like that within our parent advisory groups. This has been a conversation that has to happen at all levels. We need to bring awareness over time, and we got to make sure that all of our stakeholders see the Clarkson District not as a series of isolated islands, but really all the kids are the responsibility of this community. It has to be more than hat and mitten drives around Christmas. Those are great, but really, if we're going to be supporting quality of life and a better community in Clarkson for everyone, we have to make sure that all our subgroups have a voice and are represented. So it's going to be key that we have board support, which I feel like we do in terms of that communication. Our administrative team needs that piece of accountability as a collective, owning all students that they are Clarkson students, because they eventually go on to the same middle school and the rest of their experience in our school district. We really need to have communication, communication, communication. Luckily, we've been on the mode between written format of letters I've written out to all of our parents and community and newspaper interviews to really bring this to the forefront of the community's consciousness. At this point, I think there's a big heart. The concern, I guess, communications long term is to really get over that hump to where individuals, although they like the notion of making sure all students can learn, becomes a different proposition if there's the feeling that things are not equal anymore. And what is the impact on my child? And it's something I have to contend with within that context. But then I think really it goes into that notion of connections, relationships, and good leadership. You know, if we can really hold together and move forward together, I think that with persistence and that accountability piece, we're going to be successful. We need to stay the course. This is not a short-term type challenge, but really it's going to be a long-term investment. And we really have to put a lot of stock in our individual buildings and their leaders within this scope of narrowing this gap between our schools and making ourselves high reliability. We have to put a lot of emphasis on principal leadership and them being able to find the right collection of research-based improvements for their school to be able to push forward. That consistency and quality of leadership at each level. Looking at long-term investment, you really have to have it as a piece to where you have leadership that's sustainable, because new leadership generally brings new emphasis, new priorities. To keep the course on something as important like this requires that support from the level of building principal and central office and the school board and the community as a whole, for that matter. To really support this progress and to really show the results, it's going to be very, very important to our constituents and for our overall ability to monitor the long-term growth measurements within these subgroups. It's got to be a work in progress that's really kind of set up over multiple years, but it's extremely important that we continue to show how that we're narrowing this gap. Goals in my mind, need to stay consistent and laser-like. Strategies have to be situational, and they have to meet the needs of what we need to move forward to narrow the gaps. And then obviously this has huge implications for our middle and high school over time, because the opportunities for all students when subgroups are narrowed and showed improvement, pretty much in every case, all groups go up because of this type of investment. And I think that would be huge in terms of our middle school and high school programming as well. Concluding then, well, the important parts again, we need to monitor subgroups. I think it's a moral imperative, and we need to be their voice. We need to represent and make sure that all students are given the opportunities to learn and are provided the right format and programming to get there. It's not the same for everyone. We want to continue to go down the road of hyper-equity, knowing that pretty much everything up to this point in terms of equity for investment in state and federal programs is by and large a failure based on lack of accountability and true investment into the research pieces that need for those to be successful. And that as Clarkson Schools, as superintendent, I need to continue to push our school district to become a more high reliability school district by providing and employing this hyper-equity. And we have to look at really equity in a broader application of areas. It's not just about reading and writing, but to really provide equity and student achievement requires support in many different areas in terms of program access and supports. With respect to, again, this high reliability and success for all students, this is critical for our public school system and our democracy. The more that we get the have and have-nots, the weaker our democracy, the weaker that our strategic investment of people in terms of their ability to push everything from the GNP to just a better country as a whole. And we need absolutely school districts, when they look at their improvement processes, to look at that broader scope of data and thoughtfully invest to make sure that all students learn. And I think if we do that, collectively, school districts will strengthen, counties will strengthen, states will strengthen, and the country as a whole in terms of public education will strengthen as well. Thank you.